In this segment, we're going to be talking about creating documents with multiple screens. Now, the way we do this is we actually create multiple HTML pages that are displayed within the PhoneGap framework. Right now, I've already put up a modified base page for us to start with. And here is the directory structure for this particular application. So I'm in the www folder, and you'll notice there's index.html. So if I'm going to add a second page, I can do that here through my text editing environment. I'm using Komodo Edit as opposed to using Eclipse because I find it's an easier environment for HTML. And I'm going to go ahead and just create a new blank file. I'm going to copy my base file content into there. So we have our, first of all, connection to Cordova and some of the other material we may need. Now I've got to be sure to save this in the correct place. So it's going to go inside my project folder, which is on my desktop, called Multi-Page. So we'll go from my desktop into the Multi-Page folder, and here into Assets and www. I've got to name it according to the HTML naming conventions, and I'll call this second.html. You'll notice that the syntax highlighting comes alive once I do that. So to move from one page to another, there's a couple of different options. Now first, I can use a traditional HTML link. So we could simply say here, href equals, and then the name of the page, which is second.html. And this link can be styled according to CSS. So here, now that I'm in the link, I'll go ahead and put the text that I want the user to actually touch on, second page. Now, on a touch device, especially a phone, this can be a little bit awkward, but it'll certainly work in moving them from one page to another. Let's go ahead and bring this into our Eclipse environment so we can see it work. So we'll bring up Eclipse here, and I'm going to use File, New, Project. And here in the Android folder, we're going to use Android project from existing code, and we're going to browse to the multi-page folder on my desktop. That's going to bring the project in. And you can see down here, it's loading the data for the actual project in the Eclipse environment. We can go ahead and open our perspective. So we want the Java default perspective. And we can close this welcome menu. There's our program or our application in here. And if I move towards the Assets, www, and there's our index page and our second page. Now, I want to remember here in the manifest, I want to get rid of that error, and I can do that by going to the project properties and clicking Android and going for the most current project build target. After I hit Project and Clean to reestablish the project, the errors in the manifest will disappear. All right, so this will appear very simply as an ordinary link. Before I compile this, I just realized I made a silly error, and that's that I put the link to the second page on the second page. So let's go ahead and fix that and move that link onto the first page or the index page. And while I'm in here, I realize we need something to indicate that this is page 2. So we'll just put a little page 2 paragraph tag in there. Not even going to bother to style anything at this point. Okay, so now let's go back to Eclipse, and I think now we'll be able to look at our little demo here. So go ahead and run this, and let's bring up our emulator. And looks like it's loading. Activity not started. Got a warning here. Let's just go back and let's try it again. There we go. And there's our link to the second page. The user touches it. It moves to page 2. Now that's kind of old school. It's not real compatible with the idea of mobile applications. Users in mobile applications are used to seeing buttons or some other metaphor to move them from page to page or screen to screen or scene to scene, depending on what vocabulary you use. So more typically, you're going to see buttons that allow them to move from page to page. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this link by commenting it out like this. So instead, I'm going to put on here a button that will move us to page 2. And I'm going to ID the button as BTN page 2. And we'll actually write page 2 on the button like that. So we've got our button tag with our ID, button page 2. But there's no event associated with the button. And to do that, what we first have to do is wait until the device is ready. There's actually a device ready event that occurs. When that event occurs, basically everything within the PhoneGap framework has loaded and settled down and is ready to respond to user input. So what we'll do here is we're going to add another script tag right up here. And in that script, I'm going to use a window onload method and set that to an anonymous function. So an anonymous function right here is an unnamed function. Notice the function has no name. And this function only runs in the context of the window loading. Essentially means the window's loaded. So what we're going to do in this function is we're going to go ahead and set up our device ready event. So this is added by the framework. Document, add event listener, standard JavaScript. And the event we're listening for is the device ready event, just like that. When the device ready event occurs, we're going to run a function called onDeviceReady, and we'll set bubbling to false. So essentially here, when the window loads, we're going to then wait for the device ready event, and then we're going to run a function called onDeviceReady. So here's our onDeviceReady function. Doesn't take any arguments. So in here, because the device is ready, now I'm going to attach to the button, ID'd as button page 2, an event. So I'm going to use the same document, add event listener, and the event is going to be, I'm sorry, it's not on document. That's going to be, let me do this line over. First, we've got to get the actual button. So let's do this. Var page 2 button equals document get element by ID, and it's called BTN page 2. So essentially what this does is this gets this element on line 43, the button element, and puts it in a JavaScript variable called page2btn. Now on page2btn, we're going to add the event listener. The event we're listening for is a click. Even though it's a touch, we still call it a click. And then we'll call a function called goToPage. And again, we'll set bubbling, the last argument, to false. Almost always be false. So now we'll write the function that manages to deal with the button being clicked, which is the goToPage function. This is the delegate or the callback function. So now in here, we can write some JavaScript to move us to a new location. So we're going to use the window.location method, and we're going to assign that the value second.html. So now, again, the chain of events is this. The button here will have the word page 2 on it. The ID is BTN page 2. So when the window loads, we're going to create the device ready listener. When the device is ready, we're going to assign to the button the listener, which we'll call goToPage, which means when the button is clicked, we're going to call goToPage and move to page 2. All right, so let's go ahead and move back to Eclipse, make sure everything is saved here, and let's run this in Eclipse. So again, we'll go ahead and click Run. And oops, looks like I need to get out of the previous activity, so let me go ahead and bring up my device, click the back button. All right, now we can run it. And that should load in just a second. Here I can monitor the progress here in my console as it loads. And there's our page 2 button. I click it, and we move to page 2. So that's a much more apropos way for mobile applications to move from one page or one screen to another. Now let's move to the second page, and let's create the same pattern once again. Where it says page 2, let's create a button that moves us back to page 1. So here on second, we'll get rid of this, and again, we'll start with the button. So button ID equals btn page 1. This will move us back to page 1. And really, page is probably a bad nomenclature to use when it comes to mobile apps. You probably want to use something more along the lines of screens. And you can think of this as like a menu for a game. You might have a high scores screen. You might have a gameplay screen. You might have a sign-in screen. That's the type of navigation we're talking about here. All right, so now we're going to, again, go through the same process. So I'm going to add my script tag. By the way, in HTML5, all you need is script. You don't need these attributes type, text/JavaScript, source. We do need the source for this one, but you don't need text/JavaScript. Not for HTML5. All right, so now that we're in here, let's go ahead and we've already connected to Cordova, so we need our window onload event running the anonymous function. And the anonymous function, we're going to attach to the document here, the add event listener. It's the device ready event, which again comes from the Cordova framework. We'll call on device ready, same pattern. We'll set bubbling to false. So the next function is our on device ready. And typically in mobile apps, that's where you're going to do a lot of the initialization work. All right, so now we're going to get our button. So page 1 button equals document get element by ID. And we're going to get btn page 1. Oops, made a typo there. btn page 1. Now, on the page 1 button object, remember, that went and got this element that's on line 43, we'll add the click listener. Add event listener, click, which is the same thing as touch. And we're going to call go to page as our function and set event bubbling to false. So now we'll write the last function, the go to page function. And let's go ahead here, and we're going to move to window location equals index.html. Just like a website, you really don't want to have any dead ends where the user can't move off of a certain screen. It's very frustrating for the user. All right, we've got this saved. Let's go back to our Eclipse environment. And let's grab our device real quickly. Let's move back so we can install again. There's our button for page 2. There's our button for page 1. So we can use these buttons to move between the two screens in the application. So that's pretty easily accomplished. We've got navigation within our application. Now, one more point I want to make here that I think is fairly important is that when we go ahead and have a listener that's responding to an event on the page, let's go ahead and move back to our other environment. We have a listener that's responding to an event on the page, like the click event on the button. That event gets passed to the function, and we actually can get information about the event. For example, alert event.target.id. What that's going to do is that's going to give us the actual source of the event, so we can see when the event that's passed in, what was the target of that event and what was that target's ID. Let's go ahead and try it. That's, of course, just one of the many things you can get about the event, but this would allow us to use a single delegate function and respond to events in many different objects, simply by determining what is that object's ID. All right, so back to Eclipse and back to our emulator for the last time. So there is our emulator. We'll hit page 2. And there's our alert, and there's the ID, BTN page 2. So again, the event object gives us the opportunity to determine where the event came from. It gives us the opportunity to look at a timestamp or a number of other interesting and important pieces of information about the event itself. So notice here, go to page is triggered by the click event on the button. We pass the event in, and then we use that event object to get information about the event itself. So in this segment, we looked at creating multiple page applications. We used traditional links to navigate between those pages or screens, and then we used JavaScript and buttons to navigate between the screens, which is the preferred method for HTML5 mobile apps.